Hi, this is Izzy Hatcher, and this is our presentation called The Ethanol Dilemma, Fuel, Food, and Policy Reform. It was created by Chelsea Davis, Amanda Cruz, Jada Johnson, and me.
What is ethanol? According to the EPA, ethanol is a fuel additive derived from corn, which helps engines combust fuel better. This reduces tailpipe emissions. The production of ethanol generates air emissions of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and carbon monoxide, causing smog, cancer, and other side effects.
The ethanol and gasoline policy of today. Currently in the United States, much of the ethanol gasoline policy revolves around environmental protection. A large majority of ethanol and gasoline policy today limits the amount of pollutants in the fuel. The most well-known pollutant to be legislated out of fuel being lead, which was a major beginning of other reforms that came later. Legislation that on a federal level is enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency, commonly known as the EPA. In Europe, there are multiple different ethanol and gasoline agencies. There are a lot, but I was not able to find too many reputable sources that can tell me what they were doing and what purpose they held, which is why I chose to stick strictly with the United States.
The ethanol gasoline policy of today. First, there's the Clean Air Act's NSR program. Ethanol producers are required to install pollution controls on production facilities to prevent the emission of volatile organic compounds during the manufacturing process. Low Carbon Fuel Standards, or the LCFS. This was implemented in Oregon and California and requires fuel manufacturers to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets. Their Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS2. Greenhouse gas reduction targets for corn ethanol to 20% of life cycle GHG reduction. And advanced biofuels must meet 50% reduction performance. The Energy Independence and Security Act, or EISA, was passed in 2007 and requires specific amounts of renewable fuels to be added to the 36 billion gallon fuel supply stream. Of this, 15 billion gallons must be corn-based, and 21 billion gallons must be biomass-derived.
Food pricing in areas of high ethanol production. Food prices in nations producing crops that are being turned into ethanol are higher than what they should be. This is because biofuels are made from dietary staples. Staples that include corn, palm oil, cassava, and sugarcane, which has led many profit-driven agricultural operations and desperate farmers who may need to make a little extra money instead of selling their crops and edible crops to grocery stores and food processors to be turned into food. They are selling them at or above market price to countries that are looking to turn them into ethanol, therefore increasing the food prices in the area where these farmers are, which is parts of Southeast Asia in terms of palm oil and parts of Africa for cassava. The American farmers and corn producers are actually quite happy about ethanol, so they are entirely all for ethanol production, and there will be no issues in them providing corn to be turned into ethanol and other biofuels. Increases in food prices are going to be devastating, especially for the already devastated. Those who will be the hardest hit are those in third world countries, where food is already scarce. especially in terms of cassava. Cassava, which is a staple food in parts of Africa, along with families that are already spending a majority of their household income on food, about 80% in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa. This is a quote from Lester Brown of Environmental Health Perspectives. I think that a lot of those on the lower rungs of the global economic ladder and barely hanging on will simply lose their grip, he says. The question is how many, but no one knows the answer to that, which is more than true because in many of these devastated and financially destitute countries, the numbers already aren't being taken or they're not being taken accurately. So we really don't know how many people may or are and will inevitably struggle when many of these farmers and agricultural operations in these places of the world are more willing to sell their crops for ethanol production instead of food because they need the money or they just want to make more money.
Food pricing in areas of high ethanol production. According to Lester Brown of Environmental Health Perspectives, he once said, I think a lot of those on the lower rungs of the global economic ladder and barely hanging on will simply lose their grip. The question is how many, but no one truly knows the answer to that. So, food prices in nations producing crops that are being turned into ethanol are higher than what they should be. This is because biofuels are made from dietary staples. Dietary staples can include corn, palm oil, cassava, and sugarcane. These staples are being bought at large quantities or above market price, leading profit driven agriculture operations to sell to ethanol producers over food processing plants. So, because crops like corn are widely used for both food, feed, and fuel, it's going to drive up the prices. So, this is going to create higher feed costs. So, corn is also commonly used for poultry feed and livestock feed. So, as the price of corn is going to raise, this is going to in turn raise the cost for other products like meat, dairy, and eggs. So another example is because the rising cost of corn, this can lead farmers to relocate other crops such as wheat or soybeans, which also reduces the supply. Due to the supply reduction, they will end up increasing the price of these other commodities because of the change in land relocation. Now, of course, the different types of feed is going to impact, different areas. So, like, for example, corn based ethanol has a direct effect, whereas other sources of feed, such as sugarcane, which is known more commonly in Brazil, may have a different price or relationship with the food, as well as other non food resources. So, all the impacts are going to be different. Overall, most research indicates that there is going to be an impact as far as pricing, but the exact impact and how much is still yet to be determined just because the impact is going to be different based on a variety of factors: location, what type of products, and generally stuff like that.
Food pricing in areas of high ethanol production. 35% is the estimated global food aid budget increase required over 10 years, according to the USDA Economic Research Service, just to maintain existing annual food aid. At the time of the estimate in 2006, 8 million tons of food aid were distributed annually. The increase in budget is not only driven by scarcity of biofuel crops, but rice and wheat supply is reduced due to farmers diverting land resources to produce more biofuel crops. 83% was the 2008 global food price increase. According to the National Institute of Health, global food prices increased by 83% from 2007 to 2008. This was driven by diversion of food crops to produce biofuels such as ethanol. and it reduced the supply of animal feed, driving up the price of meat and dairy. 40% was the 2007 global food price increase. According to a report from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, or UNFAO, all major biofuel feedstocks were affected, such as sugarcane, corn, grapeseed oil, palm oil, and soybeans.
Energy usage versus ethanol production. According to research from the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, and other research institutions, it shows a positive energy gain. Research shows ethanol production provides more energy as fuel than the non renewable energy used to produce it, particularly from corn ethanol. Some studies indicate that for every unit of fossil energy consumed in the production of corn ethanol, the final fuel yields significantly more energy. According to reports from the USDA and some other resources, the estimated energy output to input ranges from 1.5 to 2.3 or higher, and then some sources also claim up to 67% more energy is delivered than used in production. Energy balance has improved over time as well due to increased efficiency in different practices, farming practices, increased corn yields per acre, decreased fertilizer use, and also technological advancements and improvements in the ethanol production facilities. This can consist of the use of natural gas and also the potential use of biomass for processed heat. Now, a primary advantage of producing ethanol is that it helps support energy security by using domestic feedstocks to displace petroleum that is imported. Some examples of domestic feedstock is like corn, coal, and natural gas in processing, which also helps to contribute to the energy security.
Measure for the energy flow input output ratio for ethanol fuel. Energy return on investment, or EROI, measures how well ethanol leverages non renewable energy to generate renewable energy. EOUT is energy and the amount of ethanol output. EN, non renewable, is non renewable energy input to the manufacturing process for the same amount of ethanol yield.
Determinants of ethanol and gasoline policy. In the United States, ethanol and gasoline policy is determined and put in place by the EPA. For European countries that are within the European Union, ethanol and gasoline prices and policies, just policies, are created and supported by the European Environmental Agency. Although it should be known that individual UN countries have their own individual environmental agencies, varying from country to country, but a larger body that watches the regulation is the European Environmental Agency. Non-government determinants of ethanol and gasoline policy are similar in the US and Europe, these groups being nonprofits, charities, and other grassroots organizations.
Recommended reforms for ethanol policy. First, we think more focus should go on the biofuels made from non-food materials. For example, using things like crop leftovers, grasses, or wood waste, things people don't usually eat, would protect food crops. Second, we think the government should watch food prices more closely. If the food becomes too expensive, there would be shortages. Then the rules for how much ethanol must be produced should be more relaxed. In other words, feeding people should come before making fuel when there is a problem. Third, we need better information. There should be a better, clear reporting on how ethanol affects pollution, land use, and food prices. When people have good information, it's easier to see the real costs and benefits. Finally, for a fourth, we think it's important to invest in better farming methods. Things like better irrigation and higher yield seeds can help farmers grow enough food and fuel crops at the same time, instead of having to choose one or the other. The conclusion. To wrap it up, ethanol is not all good or all bad. It can help by reducing our use of oil and supporting farmers, but it can also hurt when food crops are used for